Some warm welcome words from me too at the end of this really amazing week in Austria. And it's great to have Paul Mason on this evening with us. Amazing week. We all know we had a chancellor called Werner Faymann till 1.5 weeks ago, and we have now a progressive left chancellor who is a friend of this house, and we have a progressive green president who is a friend of this house, and we want to, we want to change this country from this deadlock it was in the last years. And it's wonderful to have Paul Mason here with us. Paul Mason is a prolific author, a journalist, best known maybe in Austria also for his great reporting about Greece in the last year, about the Greek Spring and the broken Greek Spring, or how we want to call it. He is a friend also from people who were also speakers on this floor already, of Alexis Tsipras, of Yanis Varoufakis, friends of this house. And he is also very near and close to the change process within the British Labour Party, which is connected with the name of Jeremy Corbyn. So I think Paul Mason can a lot tell us also about the questions we face also in Austria, because they are very similar to the questions these left-wing socialists or social democratic parties from Greece to Great Britain, from Spain to Austria are facing. Paul, the floor is yours. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much to be with us.
Okay, so it is very tempting to simply dance around with happiness because of what happened. I landed at Wien Flughafen exactly as the result came out. And the reason I'm not dancing around with happiness is because everybody on that plane looked very, very sad. Some of them looked very sad because they realize how bad it still is to be in a situation where 49% vote for the right. Some of them were sad because their guy lost. And it did feel a little bit like, I've never had this experience before. I refrained from tweeting this, but I will say it felt like flying in to a Christopher Isherwood novel. It's not so happy. So I'm going to stick to my script, in fact, because what I have to say I think is relevant to what is happening here, happening across Europe and across the world. And we could search for the sources of right-wing discontent in economic failure, in the breakdown of old working patterns, breakdown of old communities, and of course in the arrival of 1 million refugees into Europe. But the ultimate source is the subject that I begin my book with. It's the fact that neoliberalism is broken. The dysfunctional state of global capitalism, I think, has become obvious to policymakers across the world. By neoliberalism, I mean not the ideology, but the whole world system that relies on globalization, financial market dominance, wage stagnation, consumption based on high borrowing, imbalanced growth and trade, and low productivity. On the principle, Hegel's famous principle that the owl of Minerva takes its flight only when the shades of night are gathering, that we understand things towards the end of the phenomenon. I think we are beginning to understand what neoliberalism was. It was an attempt to solve the problems of the Keynesian system by destroying the social power of the working class and by replacing wage growth with credit growth. It's actually not, for all the thousands of PhDs that are being done about neoliberalism, it is actually a very simple concept. But now, it has triggered, having succeeded for maybe a decade, it has triggered 3 boom and bust cycles, and it now threatens the world with stagnation. As the British Bank of England boss Mark Carney put it in Shanghai in March, we're looking at a low growth, low inflation, low interest rate equilibrium. I agree with that. The only word I don't agree with is equilibrium, because you can't have a low growth equilibrium when 2 billion extra people are coming into the world in the next 30 years. And when you have climate change and when you have demographic aging already pushing the world's treasuries towards bankruptcy without the crisis of neoliberalism. So the financial crisis that began in 2008 has become a social crisis, and it has now spilled over into geopolitical crisis, conflict, and fragmentation. And that is the background of the rise of the ultra-right in the US Republican Party, in the Austrian presidential election, and in the British Brexit debate. So seeing the fact that this model is in economic crisis, and its economic crisis has spilled over into politics and geopolitics, is not a hard thing to say. The hard thing to ask is what replaces it? What replaces neoliberalism? For the elite, for the 1%, that's become an impossible question, because they convinced themselves that the neoliberal models, its attributes, friction-free markets, global trade, no more wage pressures, plus rapid technological innovation, these attributes to the elite are the perfect form of capitalism. They like Rudolf Hilferding in this city, 100 years ago, they convinced themselves that there was no other form of capitalism possible. Like Hegel in the 1830s, he too thought there was no other better form of society than the one he lived in. It's a common thing that the right and the left have both in their time managed to achieve. But it's really problematic because unlike any of those previous situations, the elite do not seem to be able to think beyond it. Something in almost the water of neoliberalism is preventing creative thought about where we go next. I argue that what we're going through is both the crisis of the neoliberal model, that is the crisis of a 25-year-old system, the end of a long wave, the end of a long cycle. I use the methodology of Kondratiev. We're in Vienna, you could use Schumpeter's methodology. Either way, it's the end of a long cycle, but it's something more. I think it's an epochal change. It's a change on a scale similar to what happened when feudalism finally departed the scene and mercantile capitalism came along in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. At that time, the British philosopher Francis Bacon wrote, "Gunpowder, the compass, and the printed world, and the printed word have changed the face of all the world." If it can happen once, such a high-scale technological change can happen again. So my thesis is capitalism did not collapse because of its contradictions. From Adam Smith to Ricardo to Say to Marx to the Marxists of the early 20th century in this city, the expectation was that the inner contradictions would collapse the system. In fact, it always mutated, it always adapted, it always metamorphosed itself into something that looked so unlike capitalism for the previous 50 years that many capitalists thought this is not capitalism. In my book, I quote the British social democrat Anthony Crossland, writing in the 1950s, said, capitalism's disappeared, all its attributes are gone. And yet, no, what had happened? It had mutated. My argument is simply this, that information technology robs capitalism of its ability to mutate, of its ability to adapt in the old way. Information technology has 4 specific impacts. It dissolves the price mechanism, cutting the reproduction cost of many products close to zero. It blurs the edges between work and leisure and erodes the link between work and wages. It creates, for the first time in 250 years, an innovation cycle where machines destroy jobs, but new jobs are not created by higher technologies at higher wages with higher skills, creating higher value products. And finally, it enables the spontaneous rise of a non-market sector of the economy where collaboration, non-ownership, and non-managed business models are rising. Let's take these phenomena one by one and explain them and look at the spontaneous defense mechanism capitalism adopts to this impact. First, price. Excuse me. It was the US economist Paul Romer in 1990 in a paper called Endogenous Technological Change, who first spelled out the implications of going like this: Command V, Command C. Yeah? When you do Command V, Command C, you reproduce something in a way that no other good has ever been reproduced. Information goods, Romer says, are non-rival. They're infinitely reproducible, and we can use them without consuming them. By the time I finish this, nobody else can drink this bottle of water, I hope. I can park my car in the parking space. It means you cannot park your car there. Excuse me. Excuse me. I don't know whether I'm allergic to the plant, but it should be okay. We can use this. We can use the same. We can use the same sound file together, listen to the same music without degrading it and without preventing its use by others. Romer pointed out that Command C, Command V under conventional economic theory means that in conditions of free competition, when you can reproduce something more or less for free, its price is going to fall quite close to zero. Now, we'll look at why prices haven't fallen close to zero in a minute. But let's understand the scope of this assertion. This is an assertion within mainstream economics, not Marxism. But if you want to be Marxist about it and apply the labour theory of value, it still works. That if a small amount of energy and a small amount of mass, Command C, Command V, the file exists somewhere on a server, it's mass, energy has been used, and labour, Command C, Command V. You can understand that in the labour theory of value, you still get close to zero. There's a close to zero amount of dead labour and living labour going into the reproduction. So what was it? Something like 24 million people downloaded illegally one of the Game of Thrones episodes in season 2. That's a lot of Command C, Command V. It's almost no labour, living or dead. But we're not just talking about intellectual products. As the Oxford professor of information philosophy, Luciano Floridi, insists, information is physical. It does require mass and energy for representation, and therefore the physical world is already alive with information. So the zero price dynamic doesn't just affect information, or PDFs or MP3s. It makes the price of storage, bandwidth, processing power, DNA sequencing all fall exponentially. And I'm glad to see that the Kreisky Forum has my special form of analog PowerPoint already installed, because I can show you what happens to the curve like this. The curve of all the prices goes like that. And for people over here, it goes like this. That's the price curve of bandwidth, storage, processing power, DNA sequencing, and many physical products which are alive with information as well. So 1 million transistors printed on a silicon chip used to cost, 30 years ago, $220. And now it costs 6 cents. And you think, well, what is 1 million transistors to me with 1 billion transistors printed on the silicon chip that's in one of these? Well, 1 million transistors was a Pentium 4 computer. You remember that? It was the first computer in the mid-1990s that allowed you to multitask. It's not nothing. But it's now 6 cents. And those figures are from a few years ago. Okay, so what's happening? What does capitalism do when faced with this zero price dynamic? It has spontaneous defense mechanisms. Monopolies. Because the theory says the price falls as long as there's competition. Well, there ain't no competition, I'm afraid, in some of the most crucial areas of economic life. We have got now monopolies, you know, the defense of monopolies in the Roosevelt era, in the 1910s, and in the Hilferding era here, was scale. We need monopolies for scale, and to avoid competition needlessly damaging the profits of very innovative companies like the American Letter Company or typewriter companies. Now the defense of monopolies is simple. It's to maintain price, so that an iTunes track is 99 cents, whether it's good or bad. Whether the supply for it is the supply is infinite, but the demand fluctuates, not the price. The ability to set prices and not take prices, that is, companies are price setters, not the receivers of prices made by other players in the market, is really a big change in mainstream economics. Mainstream economics tells us we are price takers. We cannot voluntarily decide that the price of something is 99p forever. This is a very unusual form of capitalism from the point of view of mainstream theory. So we've got vast industry-dominating, sector-dominating, single monopolies. You know, Facebook, Amazon, eBay, Google, Samsung, China Mobile do not compete with each other much. They simply dominate sectors. Where they compete with each other, it's often at the edges of their own business model. So that's one of the defense mechanisms. Second, legal protection, patents, copyright laws, technological tricks to make sure you can't copy a DVD, technological tricks which 5-year-old children are able to easily defeat, but nevertheless they keep on trying. But there are two problems with these giant monopolies and a system of ownership and markets based only on law and technological tricks. The first is all monopolies erode. Think BlackBerry, think IBM, think Microsoft and its Windows. Sure, as they decline, new monopolies arise, but they're always higher up the value chain. Facebook and Google are basically now advertising and marketing monopolies based on very good technology that was invented 10, 15 years ago. Apple is a hardware monopoly. The first monopolies were operating system monopolies. Now we have hardware and advertising monopolies. What they're designed to do is to harvest what we call externalities. The good stuff, the networked stuff, the nice-to-have accidental stuff that is created when we interact via networks. If each one of us tweets about this event or about the outcome of the election, we know what tweets we've had, but Apple or Google or somebody else, Twitter, knows the whole story. The cloud of data that we produce is the externality. It's a good externality. It is a marketable good. They own it. They can see it. We don't. Then imagine what happens. So imagine what happens if Apple, Facebook, Google, and the like are superseded by an even bigger monopoly. What is it likely to be? It's likely to be a monopoly based on artificial intelligence. I can only see it being a single monopoly. I don't see the point of having two. Why would you have two Google DeepMind machines playing chess with each other? The next phase of the monopolization of information is going to lead us further and further up the value chain to bigger and bigger monopolies. I don't think society can take it. I don't think we should take it. And I don't think it's functional to capitalism for the second reason. The level of protection, legal protection, walled gardens of technology, rent-seeking bottlenecks, copyright lawyers for Hollywood who insist that even when the world has exploded and is now an atomic dust cloud somewhere in the universe, Universal Pictures will still own the right to the James Bond franchise. You know, that is not functional. It's not capitalism. Capitalism, when it has to be reinvented on the computer screen of a lawyer every morning, it is no longer a granular and spontaneous system. That is what it was. We know what happens to systems that have to be reinvented on the computer screen of a lawyer every morning, because we saw what happened to the Soviet Union. That systems that have to be imposed by legal willpower are non-spontaneous, and they're going to disappear. And I think that is likely. Let's look at the related issue now of what information does to work. It reduces the values of the inputs to labour. So basic electronic goods collapse in price, information collapses in price. And at the low end of the workforce, in the developed world, large numbers of people are now receiving wages not determined by market price or labour inputs at all. It's simply that the cost of the inputs to labour have fallen so far that lots and lots of people hit the minimum wage. Everybody knows this phenomenon. You go to a job centre in Britain, most jobs that are not graduate jobs are pooled in like a barbell effect round the minimum wage. That's a well-known sociological fact, but think about what it means economically. That the market is no longer working on the cost of labour because the cost of labour is actually so low. The next thing that happens is that we're seeing the blurring of the edge between work and leisure. So I arrive here on a plane, lots of people are working. You're like this. If it was a factory, it would be closed down because it would be unsanitary. We're so close to each other. And yet it is a factory because nobody asks us whether you're working or whether you're playing a computer game. But nevertheless, we are working. We are working to targets. So the barriers between work and leisure are broken down by information's tendency to make our work modular at the high end when we are information workers. The next thing it does is it creates the possibility of rapid automation, but not the actuality. You will read reports that 47% of jobs in America are susceptible to automation, and yet month after month America goes on creating low-paid, low-skilled jobs that the British-based anthropologist David Graeber has called bullshit jobs. Jobs that don't need to exist. Example, car wash. Now, there are some people here my age and older. To us, a car wash was a machine, wasn't it? We put our car in a machine, the machine washes the car. In Britain today, a car wash is 5 guys with rags. Because 5 guys with rags can do it cheaper than a machine. How did that happen? Neoliberalism created that situation. And so, instead of automating, we are creating a generation of entrepreneurs who are effectively Luddites. You know, they'll put a GoPro in the cab of a minicab driver or a truck driver. They'll put a GPS on the arm of a guy who works for Amazon so they can see him walking backwards and forwards and check if he's doing it fast enough. The thought of replacing either human being with a machine doesn't cross their mind because labour is so cheap. And so as a result of this, in the middle of the biggest forward advance of human capability over nature ever, productivity is stagnating. It's stagnating because boom and bust cycles misallocate capital. You go to an English town, all you see, coffee shop, coffee shop, coffee shop, charity shop, coffee shop, payday loan centre, and then at the end of the street, agency, work agency, and then at the far end of the street, an advice bureau run by the council to stop people committing suicide because they are paid so low and in so much debt. That we call in economics the misallocation of capital. It's producing low productivity communities. And this creation of low-paid jobs does the rest. Now, if we imagine this continuing, and the dynamic described by Thomas Piketty, whereby asset wealth separates itself off from this poor world of low productivity and simply rises because asset wealth can do that. Asset wealth can keep itself going for a long time. The property speculator takes the profits and they buy fine wine and a painting and they employ a florist. You know, there's a whole world, kind of Downton Abbey with fake tan out there for the super rich. But for the rest, stagnation, low incomes. What you get looks a lot like neo-feudalism. You think about it. It is no longer a capitalism based on spontaneous interaction. It's a capitalism based on lawyers, copyright, asset wealth, and poverty. And it's not feudalism, it's not Game of Thrones, but it is it is a bit like Game of Thrones, because, you know, the really interesting people in Game of Thrones are all the people with known character names. They just sort of wander around and get killed. That'll be us in the world of the post-neoliberalism that becomes feudalism. So I argue there is a different route beyond capitalism and beyond neoliberalism. And it's one that we can see emerging out of the collaborative, networked organizations that grew up spontaneously in the past 15 years. Wikipedia, open source software like Linux, Creative Commons licenses for intellectual products, peer-to-peer production, peer-to-peer finance. People say, well, tell me something spectacular. Well, Wikipedia, if it were a business, would be turning over 3 billion a year. Or even if we just take what it deducts from the ad industry alone. But because we can't measure it, we can't really know what Wikipedia would be if it were a capitalist business. All we know, as I write in the book, is that if you tried to create it using capitalist methods, you could only create something more inefficient than Wikipedia. If you paid 27,000 people to regularly write it, it wouldn't be as good. And it would still be in competition with something called Wikipedia, which is free. So it is spectacular. Often, what has been produced is a solution that doesn't really need to develop much. I mean, Linux develops, it's being developed, it's sponsored by big corporations, they like it. But as a thing, it's quite good, as it is. And if you map onto the technological commons, what has already begun to happen. Now, in Germany and in Austria, you've got big so-called social economy movements, and you've had them for a long time. The organic farms, the collaborative creches. In places like Catalonia, the sociologist Manuel Castells has documented the rise of such economies out of the crisis itself. Castells writes that things that hippies used to do are now obligatory for working class people to do because that's the way they have to survive. So a third of all people in Catalonia, Castells found when he surveyed, there's a big academic survey, a third of all people have lent money to non-family members at zero interest. A third of all people. So that's a big networked, peer-to-peer, informal alternative finance system. If you map the solidarity economy, the social economy, the anti-crisis hippie stuff for everybody, and the collaborative technology-based systems, it's already quite big. Modularity, the cheapness of information machines, the rising access to free knowledge means it is possible to imagine these collaborative models described by authors like Clay Shirky and Here Comes Everybody and Yochai Benkler in a book called The Wealth of Networks actually becoming a new system. Benkler even calls it a new mode of production. The problem is, being a lawyer, he didn't realise that you have to actually explain what its dynamics might be. And all I have done in the book is to try and imagine and outline the answer to that. What would it look like if we took the collaborative sector and advanced it to the point where it began to take over some of the functions of the market sector and of the state? And I call that simply post-capitalism. Now, it's based on something mainstream economics and accountancy can't value. That is free labour done by people whose time is freed up, usually at the moment by having quite flexible, high-grade jobs so you can spend the time to do Wikipedia, or having something else that's quite valuable in the modern economy called being retired. Free labour, free time, machines that cost nothing, because software is a machine. Software is an information product, it's also a machine, costs nothing and lasts forever. The escape of information from the sphere of ownership into the sphere of social and general intelligence. This is something that's happening around you. It's something that economics can't measure, doesn't want to talk about. As the OECD said, the big impact of the internet is not on the economy, it's on something else we don't measure. Now, if only somebody in economics had actually sat down and imagined this. You know, we revere Charles Babbage for imagining what a computer could look like, even if he tinkered around for 20 years and never built it. And we revere his collaborator, Ada Lovelace, who worked with him and imagined what it would be like to program this non-existent computer. She invented programming. What if somebody had sat down in the 19th century and said, well, we could have a society based on machines that last forever and cost nothing? Well, they did. and I'm sure some of you do know, because my publishers cheekily put the word into the German translation of my title, that in the Grundrisse, Karl Marx, writing at probably 4 a.m. in February 1858, imagined exactly this. He wrote that the ideal machine would be one that costs nothing and lasts forever. It would massively reduce the costs of the things it produced. There would be no labour input, no transfer of labour. A machine that costs nothing and lasts forever does not endlessly transfer labour to its products. It just transfers no labour, and therefore the products are, in labour terms, nearly valueless. He also imagined knowledge becoming social, leisure time starting to overwhelm work time, creating a new kind of individual whose life is not dominated by work but by non-work and knowledge. He imagined a general intellect emerging. He predicted that this would blow capitalism's foundations sky high. And indeed, if you go back to those of you who are academic students of Marx and Marxism, that famous preface to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, where he describes that at a certain point, the means of production explode the social relations of production. That was written only a year after he had this insight. But of course, the Marx of the Grundrisse is the different Marx to the one of Capital, as Antonio Negri and others who studied it found. I accept this. And in a way, in embracing a route beyond capitalism, where the dynamic is one where the general intellect and the free machine explodes finally a decrepit and decaying and stagnant social relation, this is a different route beyond capitalism than the one imagined by 20th century Marxism. So in a way, it is not the Marxism we know, nor is it socialism. Information technology, I argue then, is creating the beginnings of abundance, not in every sector, but like this. Information itself is abundant. Goods with a high information content are in a vortex to becoming almost kind of information plus raw materials. That's effectively what an aeroplane is. Aeroplanes are designed on 3D, flown in 3D, virtually manufactured down to the last screw before the first physical screw is used. This has a major impact on the engineering process. It's no longer an over-the-wall process. You have a design drawn on silk or on paper, you throw it over the wall and an engineer makes it. No, the process is much more dynamic and much more efficient. We can't measure what it is, but we simply know that aeroplanes are much cheaper and safer to make, and safer to change, and safer to do imaginary stuff with. There are no imaginary... People are able to draw on paper like Leonardo da Vinci did, but for real. They draw on 3D paper and they work out whether it can work. This is an amazing change. Now, obviously, there is still the physical world, but recycling and design improvements can minimize the need for raw materials to enter the production process anew. Cradle-to-cradle technologies already exist, and if we built them in, then the objection that, yes, information could be free, but cadmium is always going to be expensive, could be at least mitigated. The socialization of knowledge also alters the relationship between physical things, services, and knowledge, so that our consumption, already you can feel it, is moving away from constantly buying things to trying to buy experiences and new knowledge. In the rich societies we live in the space of a lifetime, many of us are no longer really concerned about physical things. They become psychologically not so necessary to us. And the Internet of Things could massively reduce costs in the physical world even further, as Jeremy Rifkin, in his book The Zero Marginal Cost Society, points out, by massively enhancing capacity utilization and prediction, so that we're able to run cities, we're able to run city healthcare systems in an intelligent way, in a way we cannot do now. So information, in short, if you want to go out and dance on the streets now, makes utopian socialism possible. Or if you want to understand it in a capitalist way, it makes the prediction John Maynard Keynes made that by the 2030s we'll have so many things there'll be abundance and the problem of economic necessity to be over. Maybe we don't get it by 2030, but I believe it is possible that we get it in some sectors. So most of my ideas in the book and what I've explained today are not new. What is new is the synthesis of the two debates. The question, what's wrong with neoliberalism, what is causing stagnation, and what is technology doing to the market model, I argue are linked. And I may not be the first person to have said it, but I think my book is the clearest statement that those things are linked. And that the stagnation we are dealing with is not just a product of bad policy, and it's not just a product of a 10-year debt overhang, and it's not even, as Robert Gordon argues, the product of the one-off factors that caused the post-war boom running out, so the rising education level. It's not even that. It's money sending us a signal from the future. The future is signaling to us via the markets that Google, Facebook, the stock market, the FTSE, the Dow Jones are not worth what we think they're worth. There's not enough value in the future, but there's an immense amount of use value and well-being in the future. It just won't be captured by or mobilized by or organized by the market, nor understood by mainstream economics. Also new in my book, and I'll try and draw to a close here, is the insistence, because it's relevant to now, is the insistence that those of us who understand this new dynamic, and it's hard enough to get your head around it if you've been trained in mainstream economics, must lift our heads up from the small-scale experiment. The small-scale experiment is brilliant. The peer-to-peer technology lab, the maker lab, the small credit union in a local area. These things are great. There's a big movement out there, especially in German-speaking countries, that really understands the value of doing this. It's not a hobby. It's not a kind of niche activity. It could actually be a really transformative thing. But now we have to raise our sights. We have to start asking questions at the level of the state. And what I argue is that we have to try to draw up, on the basis of this intuition, a concrete transition plan beyond market capitalism. Now, right now, the neoliberals are in a policy dead end. You know, they've said at Shanghai, the central bankers, we can do one more monetary stimulus, or in the Eurozone it will be done with Jens Weidmann voting against it, but they'll do one. Draghi has done the second monetary stimulus, and it will be qualitative, and it will be tactical, and it will be intelligent. But they said we do one more, and then there must be structural reform, i.e. it's back to the politicians, because monetary stimulus is running out of steam, even to produce this low, stagnant growth that really annoys, people in small towns, and so they get angry and they vote for stupid right-wing parties. That's going to be nothing compared to what happens when the stimulus simply runs out of steam. So they say you've got to do structural reform. What does structural reform mean to Mark Carney, to Draghi? It means more low pay, more destruction of the welfare state, more destruction of pension systems, lower wages and longer working hours, more precarious work, free trade on the terms of the monopolies and not the people. So their cure for the disease is simply more of the disease. So this thing that I'm writing about in the book is not just a blue skies thing for us left social democrats to think about when we've sorted out capitalism. It is the way to sort out the problem with capitalism. And as a member of the Labour Party, I'm not an advisor to Corbyn, but I do meet him and his finance team, and we talk. What I've noticed is that within British Labour, even though it is now run by somebody who is technically to the left of Alexis Tsipras, there is still this heavy emphasis on productivist Keynesian economics. And what I am trying to do is to advance this other thing. Plenty of people understand Keynesianism. Not many people understand the zero-price dynamic, the networked economy, its potential scale and its potential benefits. You'll still hear social democrats say, we will create high-value jobs. I don't think capitalism can go on creating enough high-value jobs for us to make good on that promise. Without, of course, unless we ruthlessly compete for them on an international market, and we say all the high-value jobs must be in Austria and not Hungary, or they must be in Britain and not China. We can do that, and we'll go down the same spiral as the 1930s went. So we have to think about something different. I also don't think infrastructure. Everybody talks about infrastructure as a way out. Build more bridges, build more roads, more railways. Yes, do it. But all you're really doing is putting off the moment where you realise you have to electrify the city. You know, we could have a different kind of infrastructure, a human infrastructure, an information infrastructure. I think all wings of politics have to face the fact that a transition beyond capitalism is possible. It's a stunning fact. It's absolutely stunning. But I think, you know, if a transition beyond a 40,000 year situation where women had no control over their own fertility, and then from 1960 onwards, you get women begin to get control over fertility. That's a massive change. You go on Twitter, you'll see how massive it is, because lots of men can't get their heads around it. But if we can go through a big biotechnical shock like that, surely we can go through something a little bit less than that, which is we get rid of capitalism. So, if we look at the graph of GDP in human history, again referring to my analog PowerPoint, GDP per head in history is flat. Yeah? Right the way through from antiquity to the moment we discover and pillage and destroy Inca and Aztec civilization. Then it goes up a bit. And then capitalism, 200 years ago, pulls it to a 45-degree angle in the developed world. And then neoliberalism, and we have to give neoliberalism this, pulls the developing world into that 45-degree angle. And now, in some developed countries, it's like that. It's not exponential, but it's pretty good. There's only two things that can happen. Either Elon Musk and the Silicon Valley capitalists are right, and GDP will simply go exponential in the world. Or well-being and use value and utility and information will go exponential, but the market won't capture it. And my hunch is the latter, that GDP and the market will not capture, and already are not capturing, the massive improvements in life that information brings. So we need to design the transition knowing that. The principle of the transition should be to reduce as rapidly as possible the input costs to labour, because that's a massive bottom line slice of everything else. For me, that changes the purpose of state intervention and state ownership. State ownership becomes something you do to reduce costs, often to very precarious workers. And in fact, this is the relevance to the precariat today. You know, it may be better offering the precariat free healthcare, free housing, free transport, free education, than saying we're going to raise the minimum wage by $1 an hour. In fact, I'm certain that that is the social democratic offer that has to come. But to do it, you have to take back the state assets and run them in a different way, of course democratically, of course more with innovation rather than stagnation at the core of the management discipline. But it can be done. In this scenario, the market is not abolished from above by the state. It is replaced by the non-market, supported by a relentless pressure to reduce labour costs. I don't think we can design this transition in advance, but it will be modular. We can do different bits of it at different paces. Some teams can go away and work on one bit of it on their own. It's not in that sense like a 5-year plan or GOS plan. It's a modular, gradual thing. The only urgency that comes into it is where it intersects with the ecological transition we have to make. In my book, people jump up and down and punch themselves in the head when I'm explaining it because I don't talk constantly about climate and carbon. But that's because other people already do. You know, there are good enough plans produced by Greenpeace, and even the International Energy Agency, to be honest, has a good enough plan for carbon transition. Let's take it and do something with it urgently with the state. But at the same time, we have to understand that this other thing, this economic transition, is going to be hard. We'll make mistakes. We don't have an IEA for that. We don't have a blue planet plan. You know, so we don't have well worked out models or concepts. They've got to be started and worked on from now. To finish, I could end with a kind of great big kind of hooray, let's all think in a blue skies way, but I'd rather say, because of it's this day, let's think of what it means to the community that you might come from, to the small scale community that voted for Hofer. for the small scale of working class or farming place that is absolutely distraught at the fact that their identity is challenged, that their future is not certain. Let's think about what that could be. I welcome the move by the SPÖ to modernise itself and to think beyond, to be honest, what this stagnant politics has been in this country for a couple of decades. I welcome that. But if it only goes back, if you only say, okay, well, let's try and do some Keynesianism, what's going to happen? You've got one problem, the European Central Bank and the Lisbon Treaty, and I think we should start thinking beyond that box. We might have to rip up parts of the Lisbon Treaty and rethink them to allow ourselves to do the kind of Keynesianism that is urgent for ordinary people. A job, a hospital, a school, a better road, just the ordinary things. But alongside it, there is stuff we can get for free. And this stuff you can get for free also feels very good to that other part of the population that isn't so sympathetic to those small town, white working class, xenophobic people. And that's the people in this hall, the educated, the outward looking, the globalists. I think what we can do in social democracy is if we combine what I've said, the state intervention that makes cheap things free for ordinary people, with a very exciting programme of fostering a collaborative sector, of saying, just as ruthlessly as the British state did to factories in 1790, we like these things, let them flourish. Let's protect them a bit. Let's protect co-ops, protect peer-to-peer lenders, rather than as the British financial regulation does, it crushes them. Yeah? Let's do that. That is a radical offer, and I think it is the only radical offer that can unite these two groups that have spontaneously kind of separated. So the social democratic base is no longer unified. It's almost two separate lifestyles. But I think we, in left social democracy and in the radical left, can offer those two separate lifestyles, each something different, but something that contributes towards the whole. And so I didn't expect to be saying this, because my book, in some sense, is about the future things that economics doesn't like, future and imaginary things. But it's also about now. And let us congratulate ourselves that we're even in a position not to be despondent and doomy, but at least enough people said, the future and tomorrow does not belong to the xenophobic right in Europe.
Thank you, Paul, for this wonderful lecture. In my energized by the election results, I forgot that this today is a book to say that this is a book presentation in my opening remarks. So we presented these books, Postkapitalism, by Paul here, and he gave some central ideas about this book, and I will now try to ask some questions, maybe three, because also our audience should have the possibility. Yes, and it's Austrian Spring, as somebody mentioned already. Yeah? Some people might have the idea that your book is something like one more idea of the end of capitalism, just an idea of collapse of capitalism in a way, and some people for sure say, okay, in history of capitalism, there were a lot of theories that capitalism will come nearly automatically to a dead end. And the problem is that capitalism is still living, but the people with the theory are dead. So how would you answer to that?
I think we have to be critical of Marxism. And in the book, I am in detail critical of 20th century Marxism. Marx only lived through one adaptation of capitalism. You'll know that in 1848, that capitalism solved its political problem, and you got a half century of upward development. Now, you know what? Marx noticed this. If you read Marx, all of Marx's writings after 1851 are, what are we going to do about the fact that capitalism has changed and has now survived? And if you read Engels, in his preface to the history of the English working class that was published 50 years after he wrote it, he says, look, capitalism has changed beyond all belief. It's really different than what it was like in the 1840s. Now, that's the limit of the writing about adaptation that they do. But by the time we get to Luxemburg and Hilferding vying with each other for an interpretation in the Berlin party school of the SPD about what is going on, for me, what they have done is they've ruled out further mutations. And that's the first thing. So let's be critical of them. That when you talk about, there are general collapsonomics kind of scenarios. I tend to discount them. What I've tried to do is to say, well, what proved them wrong, right? And it was always the adaptation. And in the book, there is a long and detailed chapter that looks at Kondratiev, the theorist of long waves, as a potential. Kondratiev's theory is a potential tool for understanding what causes mutations, but it's a slightly better one than the orthodox Marxist one. So I basically say we use that, and we then say, why is the adaptation not following its normal path? And you see, this is what the modern Schumpeterians have to answer. Carlota Perez is the most important modern follower of Schumpeter. She keeps predicting a takeoff. If only the state will do a Green New Deal, there'll be a new golden age of capitalism. Well, I don't think that's going to happen, because I can't see where the high wages and the high value come from. And so, yeah, my theory is actually very disruptive of both Schumpeterianism and Marxism. And it might be wrong, because I'll tell you what, as Karl Popper says, if one fact occurs that is contrary to my theory is wrong. Okay, that fact would be the fifth takeoff. Yeah? If we're here in 10 years' time and all the people in Vorarlberg have got jobs that allow them to drive self-driving Mercedes, and Austria is a universally rich country like it was in the age of Bruno Kreisky, I'm wrong. But I just don't think that's going to happen.
You talked a lot about this Keynesian stuff, and in a way you said, yes, we have to do that in the, let's call it in a short-termist or mid-termist way, but we shouldn't trust that this works anymore in the way that it did 50 years, 30 years or something like that ago, because of the changes in the functioning of global capitalism, about the changes in information and so on, but also in technology and automatization. Yeah. If we raise investment, we won't get more good jobs like we did in the 40 years ago. We will raise production places where nobody's working but robots or something like that, and it's obviously clear. So, but what would you say, in which way these Keynesian measures could work still?
I think, and let me explain why I think we can't go back to the 30 années glorieuses, to the long boom, because the essence of the long boom was, which we could go back to, was first of all a rules-based global system with explicit rules. Okay, so that we don't have that. Okay, we'd have to recreate that. The next thing
we have to recreate it generally, if we want to do that.
If we want it.
But we have to recreate it in a way anyway.
I'm in favour of a rules-based system in general. But I think in the book I say that Bretton Woods had a kind of steroids effect on the economy. That's not well understood. But the next thing is productivity in the long boom. In the period from 1950 to about 1973, in most countries, real incomes are rising across the OECD by about 4%, and productivity is rising by 4.5%. So what does that mean? That even though the capitalists can afford to give real income rises, which are massive by today's standards, they could still make more profit at the end of the year having done it. And so productivity is the key to a long boom. And we have, as I explained, we have technological innovation without productivity, because we're at a stage where we can no longer replace the jobs that are destroyed, and something has made us want to. It's almost a psychological reflex. You know, the psychological reflex of Fiat and Valve in the boom was to create jobs, but high value, and to mechanize and to automate. Now, the psychological reflex of modern capitalists is to automate, but keep as many workers as you can. I don't know what's happened in Austria, but in Britain, McDonald's has gone to a touch-screen interface. So you walk in and there's no longer some low-paid people jostling with each other to serve you. There's just a touch-screen interface, and the workers work behind, and the food comes out. I rang McDonald's and said, well, how many people are you sacking? And they said, none. The purpose of it is not to sack people. It's just to change the customer experience. And that's a weird thing, because I don't think that, you know, that Gianni Agnelli would have done that. They would have said, yeah, we sacked thousands. So, yeah, what's left of the Keynesian project is, as I say, it is removing some commodities, some basic needs, effectively from the sphere of commodity circulation. And you can do it aggressively, or you can do it slowly. But, you know, we drove past Heiligenstadt. We drove past the Karl Marx Hof, and it reminded me that my own grandmother, at the start of World War II, was given a house for free. Given a house for free, and I can never remember what the rent was because it was negligible. This is a massive thing. Imagine now, if in London, if you could give the millions of young people who are sleeping two to a room and they don't like each other, yeah, a house for free would transform their life. So, of course, you have to build it. You have to build it through taxation. You have to run a deficit, and then you have to knock on the door of Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker and say, you know what, we've run a deficit. Sorry. And you know what, I think, faced with the possibility of this guy Hofer and his party leader becoming Chancellor in 2 years' time, I think Mr. Juncker might listen to you on the deficit.
Yeah, and to have a dispute with Juncker is probably nicer than to have it with Hofer. My last question would be: what you have the idea of something like a revolutionary reformism, yeah, not the old reformism, but also not this old style revolutionary romanticism. Yeah. How would you define this concept of revolutionary reformism?
I think the energy that's come in to the left, both the social democratic left and the parliamentary ex-communist left, has all come from youthful horizontal movements. On the movement of the Plateias in Greece in 2011, Tsipras basically looked out of the window of Parliament and said, that's what's going to get us to power. Yeah? In Spain, it worked differently because the movement built itself up from the streets and through networks. It had an inbuilt hostility because it's Spain and because there are more anarchists than there are socialists in some parts of Spain. It had an inbuilt hostility to parties, and it went through several iterations, and it came up with Podemos. And I think they might even be the second biggest party. Corbyn's team is interesting. Corbyn's team is a lot of old social democrats who stayed true to Keynesian leftism for 30 years, and a lot of students who occupied the universities in 2010, 2011. There's almost no, I'm the only one of the, I'm not in the team, but I'm in the milieu. I'm one of the few who are in the demographic between that. So a lot of the energy has come from people who understand non-hierarchy and horizontalism, small-scale projects, and the power of imagination. If the Paris bombs had not gone off, there would have been a massive protest outside COP21 in Paris, where people had blow up. The Paris barricades in the Commune were all built of small paving stones this big. Well, they made them 12 feet high, and they blew them up. They had them inflatable. The power of imagination, I think, is what we have to draw on. And therefore, for me, when I say revolutionary reformism, what I mean is, of course, to channel action into the state needs somebody to have the tough job of being Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and MP, and leader of a local city. But I think we also need to keep this experimental radicalism of the streets as the centre. I spent, as a far leftist, I don't know whether many of my old comrades are in the room, but as a far leftist in the 1980s, we spent a lot of time trying to work like a lever on social democracy and the trade union movement. All we did, we pulled the lever, and we wanted this huge boulder to move an inch. We thought it was a great day if it moved an inch. My advice now to everybody is to be a small stone and start rolling. That's where the energy is coming from in politics, and that's what I mean by revolutionary reformism.
One last question. I also thought, or I understand that it is a mixture of measures, classical reformist measures that also transcend or transformate the economic system.
Well, I'll answer you by swerving around and saying what it also is. I think if you buy my thesis and that we're in a 100-year-long transition beyond the market, the outcome will not be another economic system. You know, feudalism was an economic system based on force, coercion, and loyalty. It wasn't really economic. Capitalism has been an economic system based on markets, based on economics. I think post-capitalism will be a human system which has a kind of economy attached. It's kind of an extra thing. And I'm incredibly interested, and you'll see from this book and my previous one, which is about the movements of 2011, in the human transition that is created by this. The centrality of creativity, the centrality of imagination and thought to this new thing will be like the centrality of markets and our obsession with bank balances is now. And so, as a kind of answer to your question, it is equally important to this project that other parts of the human experience are central to what we worry about. Now, we've talked all the time about economics, okay, it's all economics, but the post-capitalist project is not all economics. You know, setting up a co-op doesn't solve the problem of sexism or racism or transgender exclusion. It often exposes it. The tent camps were always beset by sexual violence, by harassment, by unannounced hierarchies. What was brilliant about the tent camps is we could suddenly see it all, whereas in a Labour Party, you barely get past who's organising the jumble sale. You know, I mean, at a meeting. So we who want to do this, I really mean it's modular. You could go away and just do one part of it. You know, there are people I know, Leeds, a city in England, has a restaurant where all the food is cooked from what is given away free by the supermarket at the end of the day. When they run out of food, the restaurant closes. And it's going. It's been kept going. Does it change the world? A bit. It changes it probably more than if the same guy sat forever as a local city councillor in Leeds trying to change the quality of the drainage. But the people who work on the quality of the drainage are also important. And the people who work on the domestic violence refuge centre in the same city are important. And what I'm trying to do is give meaning to these things in a way that I don't think old social democracy has given them meaning. It's almost like they are palliative measures to make people's lives better while capitalism batters them down to nothing. In fact, they can be what Lassallean socialism always understood, that everything we can do in the 1860s of Ferdinand Lassalle, everything we do is part of the new world that we want to create. And in that sense, I'm shamelessly utopian and shamelessly, in German sense, Lassallean and not so Marxist.
Thank you, Paul. Now I will give the floor to you and you the possibility to put forward questions.